All right. Well, welcome everyone. We are gearing up for a webinar today. Don't get bottled up. Understanding EPR before it hits, and we are happy to have Emily Smith, our um, sorry, Emily Smith, our one of our Discus colleagues, Vice President of State Government Affairs, and then Bob Budoff on our legal team. So one thing that we wanted to do before we get into anything is go into our Discus antitrust compliance policy. Please be mindful of the Discus antitrust policy and refrain from discussing or exchanging information relating to pricing, marketing or sales plans, costs or confidential plans regarding output or production, boycotting another company, not recruiting or hiring each other's employees or salaries, wages or benefits, any other competitively sensitive or proprietary business information. And then there is a no recording reminder. We are recording this for after the presentation so that you guys can go back and flip through some of the comments or some of the information that Emily and Bob discusses on this call. But please do not have any AI tools being used during this recording. And with that send off, I will give it off to Bob.
Thank you, Caleb. Thanks for attending, everybody. The reason we decided to have a webinar now is because at the end of May and the first day of June, there are 10 EPR reports, 9 or 10, depending on your status, 9 or 10 reports due from 6 different states on one of those 2 days. So we also have been getting some inquiries from members about the applicability and whether they have to comply with all the requirements that these programs have. And also, we've gotten some inquiries from our craft distillers about whether they fall within the small business exception to these schemes. So that's the general background. And you can see on the screen, I just jotted down a bunch of basic terms. I'm going to try to talk really quickly. The other reason that we're having it now is because there's an increasing amount of legislative activity on EPR. And as soon as I go through these terms, Emily Smith is going to discuss some of that legislative activity, and then she'll turn it back to me. I'll talk about the small business exemptions. I'll talk about the deadlines coming up, what they are, and then we'll take your questions at the end if that's good. So anyway, writing these terms down, I'm not going to say anything for the first one, EPR, but as you can see, there's 7 EPR states. 3 of them are pretty far along and progressing and implementing these schemes. That's the first 3, Oregon, Colorado, and California. The next 3, Washington, Minnesota, and Maryland, they're kind of known as the emerging states. They are in the beginning stages, but it's going to heat up in those states as well. All those 6 states, but not Maine, the 7th state, has chosen the Circular Action Alliance, a nonprofit, to be the producer responsibility organization known as a PRO. In Maine, it's called the Stewardship Organization. And their role is to administer the program. It's to provide education to the industry about their requirements, and to provide lots of guidance that they have on their website, which I recommend that you look at if you're concerned about this. To be subject to this program, you need to fit into the definition of a producer, and you have to be a producer that has covered materials or covered packaging. A producer, all these these terms and others, they vary from state to state. But generally, you have to look specifically at each state, but generally, the producer is the brand owner of the product. It doesn't matter whether you are not directly involved in making the sales of these covered materials or packaging materials. There are also paper and paper products, which are covered in 5 of these 7 states. So you don't have to literally be there selling your product in California, for example, to be subject to it. But as long as it's your brand, you could be a producer. And sometimes the producer is not the brand owner, but is a licensee of the brand owner. And there are some cases where the a retailer can be uh, um, the producer. There are various exceptions. The covered materials definitions vary from state to state. Uh, what really, and there are exemptions from them. I mentioned there's a small producer exemption I'm going to talk about in a couple of minutes. And there also are provisions concerning states that have bottle bills, and some of them in California, because we're subject to the bottle bill legislation in California, we fall right into an exemption for our our bottled goods. Not for other kinds of packaging, but for our bottled goods. Oregon, we don't have a spirits container deposit program. There is for beer and wine. Beer and wine falls into their exemption for bottle bills states, and we don't because we're spirits. And then pallets, there are some states that have an express exemption for pallets. Pallets are considered packaging. I mean, they may be tertiary packaging. Packaging can be primary, secondary, or tertiary. And Oregon, for example, has an express exemption for pallets. They use the word. California doesn't use the word, but your pallets may qualify under their exemption for reused or refilled containers. So you have to, once again, these vary from state to state. Uh, Registration, producers of covered materials are required to register with the state in which they qualify as a producer with covered materials. And there are three steps to registration, which are set forth there. Not important to go into. It could be done online. Um, Companies are required to producers and covered materials that register. They're also required to submit annual supply reports, which both report their sales levels of products that have covered materials and also the weights of the covered materials. Um, there are based on those numbers that are provided to the producer responsibility organization that's administering the program. Based on the numbers that they get in the reports, they they calculate fees according to how much business you have in the state, measured in the ways I just described. And because the fees go to fund the EPR programs that are run in the states. And an EPR program it's a statewide program, doesn't involve us. It's all the recycling centers and the drop-off points and everything that goes into these programs, even education to the public. There's a term called echo modulation, and that basically is that they look at so-called they look at environmental factors to determine whether you are entitled to a bonus, which you would get a credit against your fee, or a malus because your product isn't being recycled in big enough numbers, or you're not doing anything responsibly in terms of the design of your product so it can be reused, and that results in your fee being higher. And that is the leverage that the CAA, the Circular Action Alliance, has over you because they will assess you malices as a disincentive to not being environmentally responsible, and they will give you bonuses because you're doing the right thing. The following terms are all terms having to do with the things that they want you to do. They want recycling and refillable or reusable packaging, source reduction, uh, we'll talk about, but that's just in California. And they also do give credit for post-consumer recycled content. So, for example, if you use post-consumer recycled plastic instead of virgin plastic, you will get a bonus for that. And all of these things are defined and measured differently in all of the EPR states. And then the final thing I had on this list had to do with how it worked these years and report dates. And basically, if you report, for example, in this year, 2026, if you file a supply report, you will provide data for the previous year. That's the data year. And you will have to make a payment when they assess your fees based on the report information you gave later the same year as the report is filed. And usually, though all of that information, which results in you paying fees, it goes to fund the program for the following year. So in a 3-year period, you've got the report date and the payment date in the middle. You've got the data for the year before, and it goes towards the program the year after. So that's my very quick summary. I hope I didn't talk too long, and I'm going to turn it over to Emily to discuss the legislative lay of the land.
Thank you, Bob, and thanks everyone for joining us today. So just wanted to give you a quick snapshot of what's going on in the states legislatively on this issue. Here you have the map. You can see the 7 states that have enacted EPR laws. Maine and Oregon were the first in 2021, and as you can see, in just 5 years, we're now up to 7 states that have passed these laws, so it has been significant activity. The grouping in green is I've called them the pre-EPR states. So these are states that have passed something legislatively as a first step or a precursor to an EPR law. So I think you can consider these 4 states to be some of the most likely to seriously consider this going forward and could be some of the next states to pass it. So we'll start with Hawaii, Illinois, and Rhode Island. They each passed legislation that requires a needs assessment to be conducted. So what is a needs assessment? It's a study that maps out the state's existing recycling infrastructure, their waste generation, and funding gaps that will help inform what an EPR program might look like in that state and what needs need to be addressed to lead to an effective program. So this could be considered a first step into EPR. Usually funding is required to be appropriated to conduct these needs assessments. So the states are putting some skin in the game on this issue. But important to remember that each of these states will need to take additional action to pass a true EPR law. The needs assessment is just kind of the first step into it, but additional legislative action will be required. You can see Illinois and Rhode Island have needs assessments due at the end of the year. So I think we can expect serious consideration in those 2 states in 2027. I cover Maryland for Discus, and Maryland took a similar approach. They first enacted legislation requiring a needs assessment, and I think that really made it much easier to go back in after they had that information and pass a true EPR law. Massachusetts is a little bit different. It wasn't a full needs assessment. They established an EPR commission actually on a host of issues. Right now we're talking about EPR for packaging, but there's EPR for like hazardous household waste, mattresses, there are a bunch of other programs out here. We're concerned with the packaging piece of this. So the EPR Commission issued their recommendations in November of this year. They recommended further exploring EPR. They recommended that the Department of Environmental Protection establish a subcommittee to further investigate the issue. They recommended that the legislature appropriate resources to conduct a needs assessment. So kind of taking a step along the lines of Hawaii and Illinois and Rhode Island. There is currently legislation in Massachusetts that would require a needs assessment to be conducted. The commission fell short of endorsing any specific bill, but overall suggested that this was something that deserved further consideration. So those are the 4 pre-EPR states. And then in blue, you'll see the 13 states that have active EPR for packaging bills in 2026. That also includes the 4 pre-EPR states. They also have EPR bills filed. I think conventional wisdom says they will wait for that needs assessment to be conducted before moving forward. You can see with the states with pending legislation, it's not just blue states. I always have to kind of check my eyes when I see a bill filed in Nebraska or in Georgia or Tennessee, setting up an EPR system for packaging. It is not really getting traction in these more conservative, these red states. But I think it is significant to see, how many states are at least introducing bills and there's some form of interest there. Of the states that have bills introduced this year, the most significant one for sure is New York. It's very much the most active right now. There is a bill that is opposed by a broad business coalition in New York. It's viewed as a very aggressive EPR bill. It has source reduction targets that exceed what's in place in California. It would require a 10% reduction in packaging by weight within 3 years, and then that ramps up to a 30% reduction in packaging in 12 years. It is currently pending a final vote on the Senate floor, and the Assembly bill is also on the Assembly floor. This has come very close to passage in previous sessions. I think last year it needed one final vote in the Assembly before going to the governor and didn't get that. And so it's kind of fast and furious in New York right now. Their adjournment is scheduled for June 10th. So we are watching very closely and engaging there on the EPR law. So that's the main one to watch. A few other states are still, like Illinois, Massachusetts, are still alive, but New York really is the state with the most momentum behind it for 2026. And we can go to the next slide. Okay. So the emergence of EPR for packaging has many in the industry reconsidering bottle bills. There's a few different terms that are used interchangeably: bottle bills, beverage container redemption laws, bottle deposit laws, but we're all kind of talking about the same thing, where when the consumer buys a bottle, they pay a deposit on that. When they are finished with it, they return it to a redemption center and get that back. So as EPR has come to the forefront, everyone's been kind of re-looking at this, and there is strong sentiment that inclusion in a bottle bill would yield reduced costs for producers and better quality recycled glass compared to an EPR program. California truly serves as the model for this. In 2023, this was the first time Discus ever supported spirits containers being included in a bottle bill. In California, spirits and wine containers were not included previously. The change to expand the bottle bill to include wine and spirits containers was done in tandem with a separate piece of legislation establishing the EPR law in California, and that exempted spirits and wine containers from the law there. We had been talking internally about, what information is out there that we could say what the actual savings of a model like this would be, and it's just too early to do that. These schemes aren't up and running, and we don't have enough data yet to know that, but it is something that we will be looking at when the time comes. And then as we're thinking about this, the New York EPR bill, for example, that has language in it that exempt containers that are in a bottle bill, not only the bottles, but also the secondary packaging. So the cardboard boxes, shrink wrap. So that is also a huge implication and would be a huge win for the industry to get those extra materials exempted from these programs. So similar proposals have been considered this year in Maryland, New York, Rhode Island, and Washington. So these all are considering bills that would establish a bottle bill type program and exempt those containers from an EPR law. Rhode Island is the one state that has neither, and there is a push there to do EPR and bottle bill in tandem. And there's an emphasis that these two programs have to work together. We're seeing, I think, out of the gate that states that have an existing bottle bill to expand those to include wine and spirits if they don't already is viewed as a lighter lift versus creating a new program. Maryland is one of those states where there would be a new program created, and it got a lot of pushback from legislators, quite honestly, because it's on the heel of such a massive law as the EPR law they just passed. But Discus is working. There's something called the Chipper Coalition. Some of our member companies are members of this coalition as well. It's the Coalition for High Performance Recycling, and they are formed to advocate for dual EPR and bottle bill legislation. And just one more map here to show you which states do have beverage container redemption laws or bottle bills in place. You can see Hawaii and Michigan are spirits-based RTDs only. You can see that California and Maine are two states that exempt bottle bill containers from their EPR laws, and then the 4 states that exempt spirits. So those, in theory, would be easier to expand those to include wine and spirits containers. I'll also say one other note about New York is that if once New York passes EPR, I think a lot of these additional New England states will follow suit. I think Connecticut, for example, is another state I cover. They've held back from an EPR a little bit and said, we're going to wait and see if New York does it first. So I think that there are regional implications, especially in the Northeast, for something like that. And so that's just kind of a taste of what we're seeing on the public policy front in state legislatures. And with that, I will turn it over to Bob to get into more detail about what's already in place in some of these states.
I think this table kind of says it about the small business exemptions. We wanted to get it on one page because you can see that in all states except for California, you either have to have under a certain weight for a small business to be exempt of covered materials, packaging materials, or you have to have sales under a certain amount. And there certainly is variation among the 7 EPR states, but that's the basic criteria for qualifying for a small business exemption. However, the one difference, California, not only do it's not just that they don't have the option of a lower material weight to be exempt, but they also they're the only state that requires a small distiller to file an application for an exemption. And not only do you have to file an exemption to show that you fall under the revenue sales dollar threshold, which you can see on the screen. Not only do you have to do that, but even if you qualify under that, the state is allowed to deny you the exemption if they otherwise conclude that allowing you out of the scheme would frustrate their effort to make those covered materials sufficiently reusable, recycling, all the good things they're trying to encourage. So it's far different than the other states. And then if we go to the next slide, there's 2 slides like this and you'll get a copy of this afterwards, just so you have citations to all of the criteria on the first slide, and also because it shows you some of the variations from state to state. Some of them have annual cost adjustments. California, you can see, in fact, California, you can only apply for a small business exemption for 2 years, and then you have to apply again. So I think you can go to the next slide. Thank you, Caleb. Nothing really that earth-shattering here. Washington State has a dollar limit escalation for the cost of living, and that's really the story for small business exemptions. So, okay, I've got Caleb, can you quickly go through the next 2 or 3 slides and come back to this one? I just want to show how much is going on in this period of less than a year. This is the most important page. As I said, there are 9 reports due in 6 states. On May 30th, California is going to June 1st because May 31st, because May 31st is a Sunday, and under the accounting rules for deadlines, you go to the closest business day. So that's the only reason California is a little off on that. But the on the very top is that Cal Recycle just issued its final EPR regulations, and that there's going to be an attachment at the end of this PowerPoint also. They're almost 170 pages long. I mean, we thought we were going to summarize them. They're very complicated, very long, um, uh, and you'll see what we've done instead. But anyway, as for these reports, I you look down the list and they all look the same, or it's hard to figure out how they're different from each other. So I've kind of categorized them, didn't write it down though, into three categories of three reports each. Okay. The first category is California, Oregon, and Colorado. And they're California, or yeah, under May 31st and June 1st. Uh, they all require an annual supply report. Those of you that have already filed these reports in Oregon or Colorado and know what they are, you've got to make a count of all of your covered materials, your products in them. You've got to weigh them, and you have to give a lot of data to the the PRO, which is the Circular Action Alliance, the Producer Responsibility Organization, so they can assess dues. So those reports are due May 31st and June 1st. The second batch, it's Maryland, Minnesota. Oh, no, you can go right back. Thank you. If you see under May 31st, the last three are Maryland, Minnesota, or Washington. The CAA, the PRO, they have kind of nicknamed these states the emerging states because, as I said before, they're behind on the timeline for implementing this scheme. And these are similar to the reports for California, Oregon, Colorado, but much simpler. Instead of reporting detailed data for dozens and dozens and dozens of material categories, you only have to lump them together under 8 material categories, kind of like metal, glass, rigid plastic, and flexible plastic. So, but those reports are due May 31st. And then on the bottom, we've got California, who has 4 of the 9 reports I mentioned that are due on one of those 2 days. In addition to the supply report, which I mentioned, the annual supply report, you look at the second one on that list. A producer annual source reduction report. The California EPR statute has special requirements for mandatory decreasing of the amount of plastic packaging materials that you use. And there's three phases of compliance. It's at least 3 phases of compliance on that. And the first deadline actually is January 1st of next year. So that's a separate report. And then you can see on the second line, baseline plastic covered materials and components report 2023 data. This is the only report that's not asking for data from the year before. Like I said before, most of your reports are going to ask for data from the year before. And the reason they ask for 2023 is because they are going to use, this is baseline data. Whatever your sales were of covered materials that year will apply in the future when they measure your progress against any of those requirements that are coming up in 3 phases, as I mentioned, source reduction requires. So you can go back. You can go right back. Thanks. So that data actually was asked for and provided by many producers in November of 2025. But I think that the PRO decided that they weren't getting enough information or the right information or enough people to provide the information. So they've just asked for it again. And even if you submitted that information back in November of 2025, you're required to submit it again. Um, and then finally, the final thing is that is the deadline for the application for the small producer exemption. Um, so, uh, so that's the big page. You can quickly flip through the next few pages because I'm not going to go back and forth with one thing on each page. But let me tell you what I wanted to tell you about the other things, and that's that. Okay, well, you're on that page. Look at August 1st, California. Producer proposed source reduction plan. Um, they they're requiring, this is very unique to California because they have these source reduction requirements for plastic packaging, and they're requiring each producer to come up with its own proposed plan of how it's going to reduce its plastic packaging and components. And When I mentioned before that the CAA has information and they also have webinars that they have, you can find them all on their website. And they actually have one next week, which is a reporting webinar where members of the public can ask any questions they want. But they have them where they give guidance on different requirements. On June 5th, they're going to have a webinar on how to prepare your source reduction plan. Uh, it has not been posted yet on their website. I happen to be on another webinar when they put the citation for registration on the screen. People had about 2 minutes to do it, and then they said we're going to put this on our website, and they haven't done it yet. But if you're concerned about this requirement, I would look at their website every now and then to see if there's any new information that they're providing, but particularly that you want to attend this webinar. The last thing I'll mention in that regard is that when you do make your registration, the 3 steps that were on my first page with terms, when a producer registers with California, they gain access to the CAA's producer portal. And the producer portal provides all kinds of guidance and workbooks on how to prepare your reports and what the requirements are. And I do not have access to it because I'm not a producer. And lately they used to post their webinars for the afterwards, the recording. They used to post them for the public, the world at large to see. And they've now kind of had a change in policy and they're not posting those like they used to. So if you're a registered producer, you will get access to them on the producer portal. Um, let's see what else I have here. Uh,
Bob, can I say one thing?
sure.
If you have any questions that you want to pop into the chat, at the end of Bob and Emily speaking, we'll be able to answer questions as well too. I know this is a lot of information and a lot to consume in an hour, but if you pop those questions in, we'll get to them at the very end of Bob and Emily's presentation.
And I don't mind if someone wants to send me an email and ask me a question. I'm glad to help them. It's robert.budoff@distilledspirits.org. Um, one other thing, as long as I mention this source reduction, which is one of their goals to reduce the amount of plastic packaging. Um, and I mentioned before about how they give you bonuses and malices for doing the right thing environmentally. They have a term for all of this. It's called ecomodulation. And Colorado and Oregon, in addition to their supply reports being due on May 31st, if you're going to request a bonus for your good acts in using the right kind of materials in your packaging, the deadline for providing that information is the same May 31st deadline for those supply reports. I don't, and it's mentioned on that earlier page where I said that all the reports can be found on that one page. So, and let's see, and that's it for reporting. One other thing several other things are actually included on these few pages, which is in total chronological order. And the other thing that's of importance to parties that need to register is fees. Fees were sent out already by Oregon for 2 periods and already Colorado for one. And we did get reports from members that the fees were quite high. But anyway, I thought I would also pull out from these chronological pages what fees are going to come due this year. So now that we covered the reports, which is your first obligation once you registered, and then now I turn to fees. Okay, there's only three fees, only 3 fees that are due this year. Colorado and Oregon issued invoices last January to pay for their EPR programs this year, 2026. When they did that, they gave producers the option of making a lump sum payment then or paying 50% then and 50% in July. So the first two fees of the three that may affect you this year are the second of those two installments. So I would go back and check your invoices and see what the dates are and make sure you're complying with their deadlines on that. So that's two of the three fees this year. The third fee is California. California is going to issue early fees in August. Early fees off of fees to pay for the preparation, all the work that CAA the Pro does, for all the background work to prepare themselves for the implementation of and the beginning of a real EPR plan. California has not begun its plan. Colorado and Oregon are the only two states that have reached that stage with an approved final plan and an EPR system that is operable. So California is going to assess early fees. They already have the data from registered parties, and that's going to be in August. So those are the only three deadlines that I'm aware of. Um, and of course, I'm going to qualify that at the end. That it's very complicated. All of this. Um, so then, however, even though this year looks like a little easier because there's only three fees you have to be concerned with, next January they get back at you. So next January, Colorado and Oregon are going to be issuing fees for their full annual EPR programs in 2027. That's what these supply reports in May are being used for those two states by the pro to calculate those fees. So there will be those two states, Colorado and Oregon, and they'll do the same thing I just described for this year. Well, they'll give you next January the choice of making one lump sum payment or making two, one every 6 months. So the third fee that is going to be a fee invoice that's going to go out to registered producers is Washington. Washington State also has early fees, and they will send those out in January. And that they will use information that is provided to them in those simplified reports that Washington State has a deadline for on May 31st. So, um, and I think that about does it. The last thing I'm going to say on that, can we just go up one page? Back one page, please. Thank you. See the very bottom, January 1st, California. That is the first of three phases of deadlines in the source reduction program. If you receive the PowerPoint reference guide that we send out to members, a lot of this stuff is spelled out in more detail than this, with links. But so, and that's when California is actually going to start its EPR program. It'll be the third state with an active EPR program. Okay, now you can go to that next page. And this I promise is really short, and that's that you can scroll through these pages very just to show people what it is. I mean, this is just a list of what I thought were important rules that they issued just a couple of weeks ago. And the reason I put them here is because they don't have any table of contents. They have lots of very long and complicated numeric references to other provisions in their regs and to statutes. In short, it's very difficult to read or know where to go. So I thought I would just provide this. So if anyone is working with those regulations and in working out their compliance programs, they have some starting point to work from. So and that's about it. So
All right. we're going to take we have 20 minutes left, and we can use this time if anybody has any questions and want to pop in any questions in the chat so that Bob and Emily can respond or send any type of give any type of clarification on any of the presentation. Again, just like Bob alluded earlier, we will be sending the presentation again, and then also it'll be a link to this webinar so that you can kind of revisit some of the points that Bob and Emily made, and then also look at that presentation as well too. But I'll give it about 5 minutes for you guys to, if you have any questions in the chat, I can ask Bob. And if not, again, I popped Bob's email in the chat if you have some more specific questions about EPR. And I know this deadline is going to hit. And from what I've heard from other craft members, they are pushing their team to get this type of information together because they don't want to get hit with any type of penalties or uh, any problems going forward. So if you have anything, please use this time to take advantage of the expertise of Bob and Emily. All right. Okay, I got one question. Can you speak to the DI minus rule for California? What have they stated and what is still left to define? Will they communicate this before May 31st or August 1st deadline?
The DI rule, is that what you said?
Yes.
Because I don't know what the DI rule is. So,
And
Is it possible
Danielle,
it's a de minimis rule?
oh, de minimis. It's unlikely. Okay, I'll back up. The statute provides that there should be that CalRecycle can issue de minimis exceptions. So, for example, the example that CAA gives on its call sometimes is that a lot of glasses have very thin, light plastic film on the inside. I think the inside, but there's a very light plastic film. It's plastic, so it has to be source reduced. And in most cases, it means it has to be eliminated. So, and it hardly weighs anything, and it hardly adds to, and in fact, environmentally, other than the fact it's plastic, it doesn't really cause any harm, like a green gas being emitted into the air. So, CalRecycle can issue exemptions, and they have not done so yet. CAA has filed 11 applications for de minimis exceptions. None have been granted, and the CAA people have said on the webinar that they don't expect it to be happening by May 31st. So that doesn't mean it won't happen, but that's their best estimate guess.
okay. And Daniel, let us know if that answered that question for you. Looking through the chat, looking through the Q&A. Well, before we get off, Bob, Emily, are there any like last lingering thoughts that you have before we get off?
Well, I hope we covered it all for you. I know it's a super complex topic, and it seems to be one that people can't get enough information about. So I hope you've found this helpful. And if there's any questions on current legislation or what's going on actively in state legislatures right now, please feel free to reach out to me, and I can direct you to the right state person on our team that handles that state. I'll drop my email in the chat as well.
We got one more question from Daniel. As this is such a complicated process, is Discus looking for a federal single solution to EPR? What is the status?
Well, there isn't, so there is. We wish there were a single federal solution. It's something we that's been discussed, and we're not the only group that's discussing it, but I don't think anything has really materialized out of it. So, um,
Yeah, I would agree. Some conversations, I think a lot of it, we're always surprised at the lack of awareness of these programs and, what has actually been passed in the state and the true patchwork of state laws that producers are having to grapple with. It's a huge undertaking. And certainly, I think if a state like New York, it passes EPR, it's just going to kind of um, amplify that message that this is really a difficult thing for producers to comply with across multiple jurisdictions and the patchwork of laws.
We have another question from the previous question about the miners rule in California. Amy asks, how do you report a minimum percentage PCR into Colorado when suppliers only will give you averages?
well, we don't really work on the reporting end, and I'm going to give a partial answer, but I'm going to qualify it. We don't really work on the reporting end. And in fact, we don't have access to the producer portal. So for example, they have workbooks on how to answer things and how to calculate things. I can't see those because I don't have access to it. I'm not a producer. So, but that being said, CAA claims you can contact CAA, the pro, and you can ask, and if they say that they're open and they'll give you answers to your questions. They always say that. So you could do that. And the other thing is they also require when you do file reports that you have to give a full explanation of all the methodologies you used and all the information. And I assume that you could put that in there and say, this is the basis, this is the best information. I'm not giving legal advice, but you may want something in terms of this is the best we could do. This is the only information we had. We have no other information and no other basis for it. Or you could just write, they have an email address on their website that you can direct and I think it's on the first page of our PowerPoint reference guide. So you can send them a request. And they also have these, like I said, next week they have one of these sessions. They still have them through May, Tuesdays and Thursdays. And if you go on their website, you can sign up. They have a question and answer session. I think there's one on reporting next week, and you could just submit. You could just submit your question on the chat there. I don't even know if you have to put your name. I don't think they would care anyway. So they'll answer it to the best of their ability on the call. They answer a lot of questions from the public because that's one of their major roles, education and guidance. And a lot of this stuff is new. Believe it or not, there's a whole lot of it I don't know. And they often admit that they don't know and they don't know what the answer is because they're
Hmm,
relatively new laws. So
thank you. Any last thoughts, Bob?
I would just say that another issue that's come up is their enforcement power, and several of these states have made clear that, and it says so under the law, that they can fine you thousands of dollars, many thousands of dollars a day, with increasing monetary penalties if you don't register, if you don't report, if you don't provide the information they ask for. And ultimately, they can kick it upstairs to like the state enforcement authorities, and they can actually say that you're not allowed to sell your product in the state. I mean, I'm not familiar with all the procedures. So Oregon, way ahead. Oregon is furthest along in its implementation. They've recently published a list of non-compliant companies, and these companies had months and months to correct. their noncompliance and didn't. And now we'll see what happens whether the Oregon regulators take enforcement action. But they've all said pretty clearly that they're going to do it if they have to. They'd rather just get your information and get your money on the piece.
Thanks,
So,
Bob.
and if you are found in noncompliance, you have to go back to the very beginning of the program and file reports for the prior periods and pay for those as well, plus interest.
Mm.
So,
Thank you. Thank you. No, we appreciate Bob, your time, Emily's time, and as issues arise in the industry, Discus is always going to be on the forefront to have webinars like this with industry professionals and internally our colleagues that have years of experience. Just looking ahead, just things to put on your calendar. We have our member fly-in that's happening September 24th, and then also the cocktail party later that night. So the emails are in the chat. So please feel free to send an email to Bob or Emily if you have any additional questions. But with that, thank you for attending this webinar, and we hope you have a great rest of your week.
thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.